Hey, Trunks, good call. What a smart boy you are. You're a real genius, just like your mom.
So we got some updates regarding the upcoming chapter of Dragon Ball Super that features Goten and Trunks basically becoming Great Saiyan 2.3 and 2.4. And the reason why I'm not saying 2.0 is because technically Videl was the second Great Saiyan if you look more like the anime adaptation, so technically Goten and Trunks would have to be 3 and 4. And what we're going to talk about in today's video is just a few things that Herms98 pointed out that really caught my attention, and one of them is pretty alarming, which actually made its way into the actual video title. So apparently one of the crimes that Goten and Trunks first encountered on their little adventure is somebody who was dealing with an internet security threat. And to be specific, Trunks responded that he didn't know how to handle the situation because he's essentially bad with computers. Now, to be completely honest with you, the reason why this made the headline is because I think it's absolutely the most bizarre thing. When you actually look at Trunks' life, if he just gets a small rub-off of his mother and his grandfather, and even to a lesser degree his dad, who is always using technology, you would think that Trunks being bad with computers would be better than 99.9999999% of the population, when you consider his dad is always using technology and his grandfather and his mother are essentially the smartest man and the smartest woman on the entire planet. So when you factor all of that in, that was the most alarming thing to me about it, because when you even factor in the future Trunks and the fact that even in a world that was limited with technology because the androids basically destroyed almost everything in that timeline, even future Trunks was somewhat familiar with technology because of Bulma's influence. Now granted, it was a totally different timeline, and he basically helped Bulma build the time machine himself. But looking at it like that, it's just so weird that Trunks in either timeline would have any technological deficiencies. And the funny thing about this too is that when you look at the end of Dragon Ball Z, and specifically when you look at Dragon Ball GT, specifically GT in the beginning, where you see that Trunks is essentially the CEO of Capsule Corp as Bulma got older, you would think that somebody who's the CEO of Capsule Corp, even if you say GT doesn't tie into Dragon Ball Super, would be really good with technology and would be pretty efficient at computers. So ultimately, guys, that is my ultimate gripe for this video. Now, the next thing that we also have to talk about is the fact that Goten and Trunks are fighting crime in a Great Saiyan-like way, very similar to the Videl and Gohan dynamic. But one thing that I find interesting that differs between Goten and Trunks as compared to what Videl and Gohan had when we saw them in the Dragon Ball movies, because that was never really explored in the actual Dragon Ball manga. It was just kind of shown that Videl was a crime fighter prior to meeting Gohan, and it's very dangerous when you consider the fact that she was basically a normal human that couldn't fly. Then when she meets Gohan, she gets some level of ki control, but you would still think that Videl is very vulnerable when you factor in that, you know, bullets are still bullets, and it doesn't seem like Videl has that superhuman level of durability to the point where a character like Krillin or Tien or even Master Roshi would have. But when you consider the differences, I think what's really interesting about Goten and Trunks specifically is that they actually wanted to become superheroes, whereas Videl kind of became superheroes out of necessity, because Videl and Gohan both kind of took it as like a badge of honor due to their lineage to fight crime, because Videl, to her knowledge, was the daughter of the strongest man in the world, at least from her perspective. So she kind of took it as a badge of honor that she had to go fight crime and do what she did. And when we look at it from Gohan's perspective, where his father literally was, even though technically he kind of wasn't at the time of around the early Buu arc, because Goku was dead, and the last time Goku was alive, Gohan was stronger than him, you can still understand, because of this hero that Goku was on a much grander scale, that Gohan did what he needed to do. And also, Gohan didn't go through life, you know, planning on becoming a superhero. He was supposed to be a scholar and live a totally normal life, but because of his evil uncle and a whole bunch of events that you already know, he essentially had to force himself into being a hero, which is also a great counter to future Gohan, who lived a very, very similar life in a totally opposite way, where Gohan had to become a hero to try and save Earth along with others, and future Gohan had to try and save Earth basically by himself until Trunks got old enough and he felt like, you know, he could pass the torch over to him. So, looking at it from that perspective and seeing that difference in dynamic is really cool. How Goten and Trunks want to become superheroes too, because they look at it as something that's cool and they actually want to do it, whereas the other characters did it because they felt it was absolutely necessary. And seeing that totally different dynamic is going to make it really interesting for the actual manga itself. Now, another interesting thing too is that Goten and Trunks are, from what we're seeing in these previews, are trying to keep this a secret. In a very similar way to how Gohan was trying to keep it secret, but the difference with Videl is how she was known as already fighting crime, but then essentially she wanted to eventually hide her identity based off of the fact that she was wearing her own Great Saiyan-like costumes too, which is also a different way of looking at it, because obviously when you get to a certain level of success and fame in the world, everybody knowing that you're a superhero is definitely going to give your family a lack of privacy, which, as we can see in the Dragon Ball world, could be a threat to characters. Even if they are significantly more powerful, you always want to have your privacy, because privacy is something important regardless of how powerful you are. Now, I also think some other things too, like the immaturity of Goten and Trunks, would also make it a lot more entertaining. When we look at the fact that Gohan and Videl are significantly more mature, I feel like adding in more humor would add a lot more comic relief to Dragon Ball, and this directly ties into the fact that Dragon Ball Super, and one of the best things that it has done, is slice of life. Now, a lot of people will disagree with this, but in a lot of ways I really feel like slice of life is one of the best things that Dragon Ball has ever done, and specifically Dragon Ball Super. When you see these characters engaging in real life situations, I think Dragon Ball really brings out its greatest creativity when you see, episodes like them playing baseball, or, Gohan fighting crime, is what we saw during the Buu arc. Seeing the characters do normal life things, but also having all of these abilities and having the connections that they have throughout the world is always a very interesting dynamic, and I feel like seeing it in a manga form, considering the fact that obviously the manga has a different level of pacing, is also going to be interesting, especially since it's Goten and Trunks, so we haven't seen them in quite a while. Now, ultimately though, I feel like the biggest change between this and the original storyline is going to be the fact that it's going to change the end of Z, because at the end of Z originally, Goten and Trunks were shown to not want to really fight and train anymore, but considering the fact that they're fighting crime actively in a way that they want to do it, this shows that this might completely change what they wanted to do at the end of Z, and they might actually have a desire to fight again, as we saw in Dragon Ball Super Hero. So ultimately, if this doesn't drag on too long, because too much slice of life can get boring for Dragon Ball fans that just want big arcs with a lot of fighting and action, but in small doses, I definitely think this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it. But the question is, are you?